One of the things I wasn't looking forward to when I decided to move alone to another country was having to be an adult. You know what I mean? Things like asking for your own apartments, going to the bank, dealing with landlords, and having to go to the dentist or the doctor by yourself. Those sort of things. So when I started feeling sick soon after I moved out of Tokyo to a village, I was very stressed out. I'm a shy person. It's very hard for me to speak out. And when I started feeling bad, I even tried to carry on with my life as if nothing had happened. That is, until one day I fainted just outside of my house. My neighbors saw it and took me to the hospital. It's weird that I had to end up at the hospital. In 25 years of my life, I had never been hospitalized before. I have always been a very healthy person and had nothing about my body to complain about. But ever since I moved to that one place, that one village, I started feeling sick all the time. The sensation started about a week after I moved to there. I started having stomach pains. It must have been something like the change in water. You know, sometimes when you move to places, it's pretty normal to have stomach problems. Then another week passed, and the pains were getting stronger. My neighbors, who constantly had an eye on me, kept telling me to go to the doctors, but I refused to do so, thinking that I would get better. I must say, I was hesitant about moving to such a tiny place. I did not want to move out of Tokyo because I had lived there for 25 years already. I wanted to have new experiences somewhere else. So, after I finished university, I got a job at this firm. However, the job involved me moving to a different place to analyze the soil and other things there and come out with a possible idea to construct different large buildings like, chain supermarkets and Targets and Walmarts and other things. Maybe not in this part of the world, but in other words, trying to make the place more contemporary. I was digging into a lot of demographics as well. The salary was good. No other place was willing to pay me, a person with no work experience in the field yet, that amount of money. So I took it. Plus, my family did push me a lot to take that job. And everything happened so quick. I got the job a couple of days after applying, signed the contract 2 days later, and less than a week later I moved. I was very nervous because, as I mentioned before, I'm very shy and reserved, but once I got to the village, I felt much better. People there were incredibly nice and polite. Lots of my neighbors welcomed me with presents, most of them delicious traditional dishes, and I was impressed that they even knew my name, but as they say in such a small place, everybody knows everyone. Some people that were there even offered to cook my lunch and dinner for me. And I accepted because, well, I'm not a very good cook. Every day my neighbors always said hi to me, invited me to their places or came to mine. We shared meals together and spoke about different things. So because we saw each other so often, they started noticing something was wrong with me. The day I fainted, I was actually about to go to work. And when I woke up, I was already at the hospital. When the nurses came by, they explained what had happened, although they couldn't tell me what I had because I had recently arrived, and the doctor couldn't see me yet, and so they told me to wait. Now, I wasn't looking forward to it, but, what else could I do? And so I laid there with my phone. And sometimes, when I use my phone, I immerse myself into my own little world to the point where I forget about everything else, everyone else. And so all of a sudden, I realized that 2 hours had passed, and still the doctor hadn't seen me yet. Now, there was no one else in the room at that point, so the nurses only came to see me from time to time. And when I saw a nurse again, I asked her when I would be able to see the doctor. She said that the doctor wasn't in town at the moment. She said that he was attending an emergency in another village. I asked her if I could be seen by somebody else, but she said that there were only 2 other doctors, one that was on vacation, and another that was busy with patients that were worse than me. Now, I wasn't surprised about the fact that this hospital only had 3 doctors, and I felt bad pushing to be seen by one since, well, I understood that even though I was feeling bad, there were people far worse. So the nurse told me I probably had to spend the night there, and just leave it at that. Now, sometimes the pain wasn't that bad, probably thanks to the medication they were giving me, so I thankfully managed to fall asleep at midnight. The next day, when I woke up, another guy had arrived to the same room. He was just a bit older than me and was sleeping in his bed. I assumed that he had arrived at some point during the night when I was asleep. I grabbed my cell phone to check the time, and it was already 10 in the morning, which absolutely shocked me. I never slept for this long. I'm used to waking up at 7:30 a.m. maximum, even on the weekends. And I was very surprised that this was almost 20 hours since I got there, and still no doctor was around. But after a few minutes after thinking that, the doctor actually came in to see me. He said that he thought it was some sort of food intolerance, but they needed to examine and test if it was really the case, and what else it could be. So he said I needed to spend more time at the hospital. I grimaced. I asked him if it was possible for me to go home and work and come back another day or even later on to have the tests done. He said it was better not to. I asked him how long everything would take, and he said he didn't know, but they'll try to be fast. They kept telling me there were many patients around, and only a few doctors. So, I guess there was nothing else I could say or even demand at that point. I messaged the people I was working for, letting them know that I was in the hospital and that I'll be here for a little while, unable to work. Surprisingly, they didn't take it badly. They said it was fine. I thought it was going to be a bigger deal considering I was new and considering that I was the only guy working on this project in this area. As I was staying in the hospital, the pain really didn't stop. Sometimes it would get better, but sometimes the pain was just excruciating. The weirdest thing is that after they gave me medicine or remedies that were supposed to help me heal, I only felt worse. The nurses said it was normal that I was weak, but for some reason, everybody I had talked to at the hospital just gave me a bad feeling. They were also very strange. They were still nice like everybody else in the village, but they didn't seem too professional. I felt constantly neglected, and they were not clear with what they said, and every time I asked something, they just walked away. Now I know it sounds crazy because you're at a hospital where people are there to get help, and you get better so that you can go home, but it almost felt as if they didn't want me to get better, and that they didn't care for how long I was there. Time passed, and the man who was brought into the room with me woke up. He was seen by a nurse, and it caught my attention that he had the same symptoms as me. The nurse told him the same thing that she had said to me, that they were short on staff and had too many patients, and that he needed some further examination, but he needed to wait a little bit for that. In the meantime, they could help him ease the pain. Once the nurse left, I started talking to the man, and it turns out that we had a lot in common. He was not from this area either. He had also been hired by a company who sent him to work in the same village as me. He had been hired in order to work on something related with water pipes, but he said that he had been hired to work on water pipes, but he said after he moved there, he began to feel ill. It all just seemed like a coincidence at first. But then, I noticed the man's accent. He was from Tokyo as well. I asked him about it and he confirmed it. I then asked him what was the name of the company he worked for. And here's the weird thing. The name of the company he worked for was different, but the location was exactly the same. Apparently, he had been hired a week after I was. I went back on my phone and tried to look for information about my company and his and anything about it, but I found nothing, which was very off, considering when they offered me a job to work with them, they had a company website. I started feeling very uneasy, but I didn't tell the other man anything. And after all, part of me hoped that it was just all a big coincidence, and I was overthinking the situation. But what a big coincidence. Two men from the same city who had been sent by what seems to be the same company with the same promises. It didn't sound right. As I was about to text my parents, something very strange happened. We heard a man screaming for help. We looked at each other utterly confused, and all of a sudden, the man entered the room, and he was wearing a hospital gown. It looked to be a patient. "Help! They're coming for me!" He was screaming at the top of his lungs. "We need to escape! Hurry up!" "What are you talking about? Just calm down. Are you okay?" I asked him. "It's all fake. It's all part of their plan. It's not safe here," he screamed. Unfortunately, at that moment, the doctor, 2 nurses, and 2 other men, which I've never seen before, came for him. They were trying to grab him and take him out of our room. "You need to leave. They'll do the same to you. You're going to meet the same fate. You need to run away from them." He said this as a doctor jumped on him and slammed a needle into his back. In a matter of seconds, he fell asleep. The doctor then told us he was a patient who was mentally ill and was presenting hallucinations. He apologized for the inconvenience, but reassured us that there was nothing to be afraid of. Well, that didn't sit too well with me. Even though the man looked very worried and desperate, he did seem honest. I could see the fear in his eyes. Strangely enough, after that had happened, the internet failed. I tried to send a message to my family, but it was impossible without Wi-Fi, internet, or even a cell signal. The guy's phone that was in the bed next to me wasn't working either. We started talking about how if things didn't get better at this hospital, we'll go to another. The man had come to the hospital in his car and showed me where the car keys were. As we were talking, a nurse passed by and said the doctor will see us soon, but before that, she gave us some medicine. I don't even know when, but I assumed right after that, I just fell asleep. When I finally awoke, it was already nighttime. I was very weak, and it was hard to open my eyes. It took me a few minutes to be conscious, but when I finally felt a bit better, I noticed that the man was no longer there. I took the drip out of my hand and went up to his bed. I moved the pillow and noticed his car keys and cell phone were still there. So I wonder where he had gone. I started calling for the nurses, but nobody was showing up. I looked at the clock, and it was soon going to be midnight. I started feeling even more uneasy than before, so I decided to leave the room and look around the hospital, seeing if I could find anybody. As I left the room, I started exploring the rooms nearby, and I noticed something. They all looked empty. There wasn't a soul around. No staff. No patients. Hell, there wasn't even hospital equipment. I had no idea where the hell I was, because when I was brought in, I was unconscious, so I didn't even have a chance to look at anything but the room where I was kept. As I was desperately looking for an exit, I saw a light at the end of the corridor. I noticed it came from a door that was halfway open, and when I got close to the door, I decided to peep through it, and I saw something disturbing. I saw some people on their knees chanting and bowing. They were there with some of the people who were very familiar. They were my neighbors. Now I couldn't understand what they were chanting at, and then I noticed something. The man that was previously laying in the bed next to me was on the floor, completely unconscious. This was twisted. I wanted to do something, but I didn't. And as they kept chanting, this creature thing appeared in the room. I'd never seen such a thing before, and I couldn't see him very well, but what I saw was enough to scare me forever. This thing was about 7 feet tall. He seemed as if he had no shape. He was just this giant black mass. His face, on the other hand, was very detailed. He had many little eyes across this face, sort of like a spider, and a giant mouth that reeked from miles away. I saw the creature coming closer, and eventually grabbed the man with his big, amorphous arms, and pulled him near his mouth as if he was going to devour him. Now, I don't know if what I did next was a sign of cowardness, but I just decided to get away from there and try to find the exit. I tried to be quiet so that the others wouldn't hear me or suspect anything. Eventually, I managed to get out through one of the windows and started the man's car. And as I was leaving, I looked at the place and noticed that they were looking at me through the windows as some of them also jumped out. I assumed in order to follow me, so I drove away as fast as I could. I didn't even look behind, I just drove as my adrenaline was pumping. I'm not sure for how long I drove, but I passed through many villages, and I was paranoid so I didn't stop. But once I saw a sign to a familiar city, I made my way there. And once there, I noticed that my phone was working again, and I headed straight to a police station. I got a lot of looks as I walked into the station. I guess my hospital gown and crazy look didn't help me at all. Also, me telling them about villagers and this possible monster didn't help, and I'm sure that they didn't believe a thing I was saying. At some point during their investigation, I collapsed and fainted just due to the exhaustion. When I woke up many hours later, I was more calm and I gave them all the information, but I think they were thinking I was a loony who had escaped from an institution, and so I told them to call my family. My family obviously confirmed that I was in fact living in that village, and that I had supposedly been at the hospital. The authorities went to the place and ordered to check my house and the hospital, and in the meantime, my parents came and picked me up. The next day, the police informed us that they had found nothing suspicious. First of all, they said that there were no hospitals or even signs of any clinics in that village, and that the next hospital was miles and miles away. They had searched around the area, but couldn't find anything strange or unusual. In fact, the villagers seemed very normal and have expressed their concerns regarding me. They claimed I had been acting paranoid before abruptly leaving the village. My car was never found. They did confirm the car I had arrived in. It was the man in the bed next to me. But he had no family or friends, and they couldn't confirm who he was. The case basically led nowhere. Not even my own parents believed me, and I was made to feel ashamed. This happened in 2014 and afterwards. I was put in a mental institution for some months, and there I was taught that nothing had happened, and that it was all in my head, to the point where I started to believe that. In fact, I wanted to believe that. However, here I am, many years later, trying to live a normal life, but it's just impossible. Whenever I close my eyes, the only thing I can see is that creature coming at that man as a crowd just sat there smiling and chanting. I know what I saw, and it haunts me every day of my life. I want to move on, but it's hard to move on when you're the only one who knows a dark truth. I can only wonder why the agency and these villagers had this plot, and if they still lure people there. There's something that tells me that they still do, and that we were not the only ones.